Hey guys, welcome back. Zach and Cody with Extreme Outfitters, and today we're going to go over the 3 things every bow hunter must do prior to hunting season. Stay tuned. All right guys, thanks for joining us. Like we said, there's 3 things that we see at our shop that bow hunters, they need to do prior to the season. And we'll go ahead and get right into it with number 1 is you need to have your bow inspected and tuned prior to the season. We see this all the time.
Indeed, especially strings, man. Strings are probably one of those things that I would say most guys think that they can run multiple years and years and years on end without thinking of wear and tear, and you got to think of elongation. I tell everyone, come in a couple months early. If you think you need new strings, you probably do.
You do, absolutely. And that's one of the things, if you're on the fence about strings, go ahead and get strings. Yeah. It's going to save you a lot of headache in the future.
And I actually have a backup set with every set of strings. So if I buy a new bow, the stock string I'll keep, and I'll have the new set of strings already put on.
Right.
You know, so, and it's just kind of one of those things. The last thing I want to do is be in the middle of a season and, you know, a broadhead hit a cable, and now I got to wait a couple weeks because string manufacturers do get backed up.
Yeah, when you're looking at, especially for us, when we see whenever people come in right before the season, you can be waiting 4 or 6 weeks.
Yeah, indeed.
And that's going to, you know, start you off behind in your season already.
Indeed.
So, and along with strings too, we look at, you know, just having them looked over is D-loops.
D-loops, not only that, serving around the peep sights and stuff, because the number one thing to miss is to have your peep sight move up and down. That's going to change everything as far as your vertical up and down and stuff. Moving your peep sight down, you're going to hit low every single time. Moving it high, if it slips up higher, you're going to miss high every single time. Yeah. So just those little details right there, and also checking the servings around where your cables and stuff like that would be, and even the center serving. I think this is the if you have good strings on your bow and you know it, at least go get your center serving redone. Right. This thing right here, if this thing slips, moves up or down any little bit, it's just like moving your nocking point up and down. So that can affect accuracy and tuning issues as well.
Right, and so when we say get the bow inspected too, yes, you can look your bow over, but we highly recommend you take it to a bow shop.
Yeah, don't take it to a backyard bow tech, man. Those guys, some of those guys know what they're doing, but if you take it to a professional, not only that, if anything were to happen, you know, that shop's going to take care of you. So
absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things that when you take it to a good bow shop, they do this every day. Mm-hmm. They know exactly what to look for, so it's going to cut down on the time and any of the headache for you when it comes to making sure the bow is in working order.
Indeed. Probably the next thing I'd say is paper tuning. Make sure your bow is tuned.
Tune in general.
Yes, tune. At least paper tune. At least paper tune. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Next is probably like broadhead tuning or stuff. Some guys go down that rabbit hole, you know, as far as different tuning methods. Whatever works for you works best. Typically with me, paper tuning, I shoot a good hole through paper. I can pretty much put any broadhead I want. If you have really good form, you can execute a good shot, then you're going to shoot pretty much as accurate as you possibly can be with a broadhead.
For us, standard at this shop, every bow that walks out of the door, when it comes to tuning, gets paper tuned. And that's a great starting point. We know that arrow is flying true right out of the gate.
Indeed.
So that is one of the things that we do as a shop is we always paper tune bows.
Indeed. Probably equipment check would probably be next on the list, man. Think about your sight, making sure all your nuts and bolts are there. I've seen sights come in without a nut on the, you know, the first axis.
Right.
They only have one on there. You know, especially a slider sight, if your first axis is off, if it's on a cant, all you're doing is moving those pins as you scroll down, left or right, depending on which way it's angled. And you're just going to miss further and further, whether you go back in distance. That's a big thing. Make sure your nuts and bolts are, you know, all the stuff is there on your equipment.
Right, absolutely. So when we refer to equipment as well, we're talking quiver. Make sure the quiver is not broken. We've seen people who, you know, this happened to Ruben at Extreme Hunter Athlete. Mm-hmm. He mounted his quiver on, and this was last year. He took his first shot, and the quiver actually hung up his rest, and he missed the target completely.
Yeah, that's just, I mean, I remember hearing about that. That's kind of funny. That would happen to Ruben.
Yep, it would, absolutely. So, you know, we're talking equipment, we're talking everything. We want to look at the bearings and the cams. You know, we've had issues with
dirt, grime, grit. I mean, make sure your bow, like, I think that's another thing, is an annual cleaning.
Absolutely.
You know, take everything apart. Make sure your axles are, you know, your limb pockets are greased like they're supposed to be. Your axles are clean. That's just going to enhance the performance of the bow in general.
Right, and this we recommend at least once a year, you know, with a full inspection of the bow, and that's a full tune. And we're talking about, we're putting it on the draw board. We're making sure it's in time.
Yes.
Everything.
String stretch, man, that's another thing. That's why at least once a year, you know, run the bow through paper, see what's going on. Make sure your timing is a big key too.
Right.
You know, make sure everything's squared away with that. Another thing is inspecting your arrows. I can't tell you how many times I've heard horror stories of guys sending a piece of carbon through their arm because, you know, they're shooting groups, which everyone does, and, you know, you nick an arrow just right. You're not flexing it, make sure everything's good to go. you end up with a piece of carbon in your forearm or in your hand. That's a bad time. You're not shooting your bow for a while.
Yeah.
So
that'll end the season quick.
very fast. Very fast.
You know, equipment as well. One of the major components when it comes to bow hunting is obviously the broadhead.
Yes.
You know, we get a lot of guys who buy broadheads and have broadheads left over from the previous season, and they're bouncing around in their case. You know, and they'll go to take a shot on ammo without inspecting these, and your mechanical broadhead doesn't deploy or prematurely deploys.
Let's get into something else, sharpening a broadhead.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of broadheads from manufacturers are not as sharp as they should be. I mean, just saying it how it is, you know, touch some things up. You want to have a better success at a pass-through, make sure the broadhead's sharp.
Yeah, absolutely.
So spin test them as well. Make sure your broadhead, you know, make sure you put that thing on an arrow spinner, come bring it to the shop. We'll make sure there's no wobble or anything with it, you know. You can cut out that arrow, you can eliminate that arrow from even being in your quiver, you know, for it being shot as a hunting arrow.
Right.
You know, that could just be a practice arrow, so.
Yeah, one of the things we do too, or at least I do personally, is I'll go through all my arrows and, you know, I shoot the same arrow that I'm going to hunt with,
Yes.
but I separate them. My best arrows tend to
yeah.
get set aside for as hunting arrows.
Correct.
So I don't know if you do
I'll
that.
do a number system. I'll take like my top 5 or whatnot. I have a 7-arrow quiver.
Of course you do.
Dude, and I buy a lot of arrows. I buy high volume arrows for that reason. I'm picking the best out of a lot to be the most accurate, you know, missiles that I want to launch.
Even out of match grade arrows.
Yeah, I don't even care. Like it can say match grade. 99% of the time, if it says match grade, it's going to be super straight.
Right.
But we're trying to eliminate any kind of variable or error in the process.
Right. So, number one, make sure that bow is inspected and tuned. Like
Yes.
we said, go to a professional, get it looked over. Center shot,
Yep.
timing, the draw weight. I mean, like Cody says, with the strings that stretch, you can
Yeah.
lose draw weight on there.
And that can affect your spine of the arrow, you know?
Absolutely.
I mean, that can affect accuracy, all kinds of stuff. People don't realize there's a lot. Archery is not as hard as what people make it out to be. But then again, there's the flip side of where it is as hard as people make
very
it out
technical.
to be. It is very technical. It's very intricate as far as everything that's involved in it.
In order to get optimal arrow flight.
Correct.
And when you go hunting, you want optimal arrow flight because the last thing you want to do is wound an animal because your bow was not set up correctly.
You're going to be sick laying
Yes,
in bed thinking
absolutely.
about that thing.
Yes, it's
So
a
we've
bad
all been
feeling.
there. We've all
Yes.
been there.
So, moving on from there, after you get the bow inspected, the next thing, number 2, shoot your bow.
Indeed.
You should be spending time behind that riser all year.
Yep.
Not just a week before the season. You know, we see a lot of guys that do that. Their bow gets put away after the season. They don't bring it back out until right before the next season.
Yep.
And, you know, there's a lot that changes. Even with that bow just sitting in that case, one, your form breaks down if you're not shooting your bow consistently. You don't have that endurance built up.
You're not in shooting shape
You're not
whatsoever.
absolutely
Yep.
shooting shape. That's a big thing.
And see, I have a big transition from that being, I'm big into target archery. So me shooting a 65 to 60 pound bow all year, then jumping up to a 75 to 80, 70, 75, 80 pound bow. That's a big difference, man. 10 pounds, and especially the volume of arrows you shoot. You can shoot a high volume arrows all day long you want to.
Right.
But when you get up to that upper poundage, that peak poundage as far as hunting bows, that's a different ballgame, man. And that's going to throw you off a little bit. So I'm transitioning right now into shooting my bow, my 80 pound bow, more and more.
Right.
So we're getting into that shooting shape is what we'll
And
say.
we're not saying go out and shoot 100 arrows every day.
Yeah,
We know that's not realistic for a lot of people. But you need to spend time behind the bow.
If you can't get behind 10 arrows a day, you probably don't need to be behind a bow.
Yeah,
mean,
realistically. I mean, I know there's, we get a lot of stories, I just pulled my bow out and I killed this monster. We get it, but, how many guys pull that bow out, aren't shooting it up and miss?
Yep.
Or, have, a catastrophic issue with the bow because the bow hasn't been shot and they didn't have it inspected.
Yep.
So there's a lot of things to consider.
Indeed.
When it comes to shooting your bow, as the season gets closer, one of the things we recommend too is shoot the broadhead
Yes.
you plan to hunt with.
Yes.
Broadhead tuning is a thing. I mean, there's a lot of guys who will slap a broadhead on there and go out and hunt and wonder why, they're not hitting what
miss
they're
2
aiming.
foot that way or 3 foot this way, and that comes along with being your bow being tuned as
Right,
well.
absolutely. It all works together.
It's very intricate. It all blends in together. Your broadheads, as far as fixed blades, depending on how big the head is and stuff. And when we mean by shoot your bow, play around with things too. Sometimes, like I'm finding out a 3-fletch flies better for me at a further distance than a 4-fletch does. But a 4-fletch for me flies better in at a closer distance. Everything just groups a little bit tighter with a 4-fletch, like at 50 and in. But with a 3-fletch, everything for me out of my setup flies a little bit better with a 3-fletch, that 50
Right.
yards and out. So, I mean, you got to play around with those things to know that. And that comes down to spending time behind your equipment, spending time with your bow. And then, even broadheads, we'll go back again, sharpen those things, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Keep a separate pack that you're not going to shoot, shoot once or twice. Those are going to be your broadheads you're going to hunt with. Your other ones, make them your practice broadheads.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and when we say practice with your broadheads, we know a lot of them come with the practice head.
Yeah.
sacrifice a broadhead.
Yep.
It's worth it. I mean, pull one out of the package, sacrifice that actual broadhead, and shoot that thing to see how it actually flies. Because a lot of times, the practice heads are close, but it's not the real thing, especially with a fixed blade.
You can't have. There's some companies, they sell a ballistic match point.
Right.
It kind of mimics the aerodynamics of a broadhead, but it truly doesn't because it's not the same shape or size.
Absolutely.
It's the same grain, just like a field tip would be. But other than that, I mean, just shooting your broadheads, making sure everything's flying good. Even if you're shooting mechanicals, everyone knows 99% of the time, if you screw a rage on there or something along the lines of that, it's going to pretty much fly and hit behind the pin. But another thing that is critical, I think, that people don't do is they don't shoot distance. You're half as effective at your, the distance that you normally shoot at as you would be hunting.
So, and we see a lot of this. A lot of guys, I don't shoot past 30 yards. The bows now, I mean, are more than capable of shooting great distances. We're talking 100 yards plus.
Yes.
But one of the things that I do that gives me confidence when I'm in the woods or hunting or doing whatever is shooting that distance. Because when I go from shooting 80 yards to majority of my shots are within 30 yards,
chip shot, dude.
It's nothing. Even under any kind of stress, weird position, I can hold that bow and I can shoot that distance no problem. And like Cody was saying, effective range technically
normally half of what you shoot at.
Yes. So if you're only shooting 40 yards,
you shouldn't be taking more than a 20-yard shot.
Right.
There's a lot of things, and a lot of people don't practice this. There's a guy I'm a big fan of. His name's Joel Turner.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about concentration and focus. People will just go out there and go through the motions when they're shooting. You don't have a shot process down. You don't have anything that you're following to a T, and you can get lost real quick when an animal shows up. I've done it. I've literally not necessarily blacked out, drawn back, got into my peep, put the point on, and forget what I'm doing. I'll either dump a hinge or punch a button. I'm not thinking. I'm not getting my process the way I should be. But you definitely, I think shooting distance is a critical aspect as far as getting your effective range up.
Right, absolutely. So, and the other thing with shooting is we talk about is make sure, we get some guys that are shooting multiple releases.
Yes.
Shoot the release that you plan on hunting with. If you've spent all year just shooting a hinge and then you're going to go back to a button, you might want to get introduce that button back in prior to going back out in the field and hunting.
And have a backup release that's identical. I can't tell you the amount of times I left the release home.
Or how many times have you climbed up a tree and then your release fell out and you're looking, 15, 20 feet down, hating yourself because your release.
And set them identical. I mean, that way you can't tell them apart. You don't have a favorite. You have a spare and the one that you're shooting with essentially. But I have two releases. I have 5 or 6 releases and they all shoot the same.
So spend time behind the riser. We cannot preach this enough. Get out there early enough and shoot your bow. Indeed. Make sure your bow's sighted in. That's another thing. Make sure all your pins are sighted in. Make sure your sight tape, if you got a adjustable sight, make sure your sight tape is on, so nothing has changed. Spend time behind that bow so whenever you go out in the woods, you are 100% comfortable and confident with your equipment.
Indeed.
So what do we got next? What would be number 3?
Dude, I think this is the most overlooked thing, and this doesn't necessarily deal with a bow, but inspecting your actual equipment you're hunting out of and in.
Right.
You hear horror stories about people falling out of harnesses, breaking. People don't realize this, but harnesses only have a 5-year safety warning or safety rating on them. I found that out almost the hard way because my seat was ripping out of my harness, and I'm like, this is stupid. I need another one. And then my dad, he works in the mechanical industry, and they have to wear safety harnesses. They throw them out every 5 years because that's what they're rated for. They're only rated for 5 years regardless.
Right.
Inspect your saddles. Make sure all your ropes and everything are good. You see something that's, marred up and whatnot, trash that thing, get a new one. It's not worth risking my life getting up in a tree 20, 30 foot up and falling down, and
absolutely.
You'll be wheelchair bound. People break bones that way.
Yep.
Shooting out of a ground blind, that's another critical aspect, man. I've shot at animals where I've hit my top canvas hit the blind like an idiot. And I'm like, why didn't I do this earlier?
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's just all those little things, they add up and they matter. Being familiar with your equipment is crucial for a successful season.
Yes.
And like you said, just for safety in general, if you're going to climb up a tree and you haven't pulled out your equipment, checked it, inspected your ropes, the actual harness, your steps, your stands. How many times have you heard the story of when a stand sits out in the woods all season, it's rusted. You go to climb up that thing and that thing breaks.
Yeah. And people don't inspect their cables a lot either. Summit's a very popular tree stand manufacturer, Millennium and all that stuff. You got to inspect the actual cables that go around the tree.
Right.
Because if they break or bust, man, that's not on the manufacturer, bud. That's on you.
Yep.
You're not getting a check from that. So inspect everything, and shoot out of the equipment that you're hunting out of. Shoot out of your saddle, shoot out of your tree stand, because it is a different dynamic.
This is big. So there, saddle hunting is all the rage, right?
Yes,
Everyone's getting into
up.
saddle hunting. And there's a lot of people that are just now first time getting in a saddle, and they take it in the woods and they get up in there. Well, they go to shoot these different positions and their tether's in the way, or they're at a weird angle and they realize that they
even
can't
drawing
draw
the bow back
yeah,
is
it's
weird.
different.
Yep.
Whenever you're in a tree, you don't want to have to rip that bow back.
Yep.
You want to be, the least amount of movement and motion possible. So you need to, one, be able to handle your bow.
And that comes down to spending time behind shooting your bow.
Behind the riser.
Yep, spending time behind the riser.
Absolutely. And shooting from an elevated position is different than shooting from the ground.
Yes. Yep. And going along with that, if you have the ability to have a 3D target like a Reinhardt or something like we sell.
That's anatomically correct.
Correct. Shooting people, you don't shoot at the point of impact. You shoot for the point of exit.
Right.
So people a lot of times will hit too far forward on a quartering away animal if you're shooting high up, or too far back on a quartering towards animal.
Right.
So you have to shoot for exit, not impact. And just know even knowing your anatomy of the animal you're hunting. And that's
big.
shooting your 3D target along the lines of that. Up in an aerial, seeing if you're going to be up off the ground or in a ground blind, because things and dynamics can change. Even the lighting in a ground blind you can be messed with.
Right, yeah, absolutely. So, and like you said, it's going to a 3D animal. How many of us spend time shooting a block all year or a bag target, and then when an animal walks out, you're like, where do I actually put my pin on this animal?
Indeed.
That's where 3D target really comes into play and it is great. Set it out, get in your yard if you have the ability to, climb up a tree, and practice shooting that 3D target from that position with your equipment.
Another thing of equipment that we oftentimes forget about is checking our batteries and our rangefinders.
That's a big one.
Even it happened to me this year. Ranged the target. What my rangefinder said was 34 yards. Deer comes out right in front of it. I put my 35-yard pin on. I'm going to smoke this doe. Come to find out, that animal was 41 yards. I've got little T-Rex arms. If you can't see, I got a 27-inch draw link. I'm not putting up speeds at the bow I was hunting with last year like I am this year. So I shot under that deer. And I went to go range it again. It read 41 yards, 42 yards. So my rangefinder was inconsistent because my battery was dying.
Right.
Even checking like your binos, I can't count the amount of times I've seen guys show up at a tournament. I know this isn't a tournament style video, but their binos break.
Yeah.
You're SOL. You're not going to see a 12 ring. What happens when you're going on a hunt? You're going to look for stuff. You're not going to have any implementation of whether deer's coming in or not. So you're going to be caught off guard.
Yeah, absolutely. Spend time behind the riser. That's the one thing we can't preach enough. Get familiar with your equipment. Make sure, even when it comes down to, as the weather gets colder, you're spending out time outside in the woods and it's cold out, and you go from shooting in short sleeves all summer, and then you put on a jacket or something with long sleeves.
Yes.
It's different.
Even gloves. I know the people that hunt with gloves and go to shoot with them. Guess what? The thickness of that glove, especially if you shoot a handheld or even a wrist release, it goes from on your face to off your face.
Yep. You want to ND a release real quick?
Go fast.
Because you can't feel it because you got gloves on, you'll do it. So, put your gloves on, put a jacket on, make sure that jacket doesn't stick out too much.
You got to practice how you play, man.
Absolutely.
Practice how you play.
That is one of the biggest things.
Yeah, and a lot of times we get guys that come in here, man, I miss because my bow. A lot of times, man, it is the wizard and not the wand when it comes down to it.
Right.
And that comes along with shooting your bow once again. That's the biggest key that we got to take away from
Yes.
this.
So let's recap it. So number one, make sure that bow is inspected. Make sure it's in working order. Everything on it is functioning correctly. Strings are good. Your arrows
all the
are good.
hardware is where it's supposed to be at.
Right, absolutely. And that means, whenever you get behind your bow or whatnot, you're 100% confident in the equipment. So if there's any failure, it's on you at this point.
Yep.
It's not on the equipment. You don't want to go in the woods or spend all this money on a hunt.
Or even second guessing your equipment.
Yeah.
That's another thing.
That's big. You spend all this money, let's say you spend all this money to go on this high dollar hunt, and your equipment's not up to par, and you have a failed hunt essentially because of equipment. That's terrible.
Yep.
That's a whole wasted season and wasted money. So make sure your equipment is up to par and inspected by a professional. Take it to a shop that you trust, that's got quality techs behind the counter that are going to do good work and take care of you. Yes, every day. They see this stuff daily, so they know what to look for. Number two, probably should be number one.
Shoot your bow.
Shoot your bow.
Yep.
Spend as much time behind the riser as you possibly can.
That's truly knowing your equipment.
That's it.
Yep. Knowing how the bow feels.
Yep.
You can diagnose a problem. I can diagnose a problem real quick with my bow. by being shooting it so much,
Right.
I can tell like, oh, my bow's out of time. I can feel it.
Yep.
I can feel it out of my bow. Oh, my peep slid up. My anchor point's changed. Or my center serving slid. Like if you spend more time behind that bow, and the more you get to know it, it's kind of like dating. The more you get to know a woman, I mean, the better off you're going to be. You know, shoot your bow. Do what you're supposed to do.
And number 3, get familiar with your hunting equipment. So that's your stands. That's your even the apparel, the clothing that you're going to wear.
Yep.
Your ground blind. Big one, like you said, rangefinder. Making
Yes.
sure all your batteries are replaced and ready for the season.
Indeed. Other than that, man, that pretty much caps this thing off. We got a ton of other videos we got coming out, and there's a lot of bow reviews that people are searching for right now. So go check them out on our YouTube channel,
Yeah.
and we got plenty of them.
If you're still looking for a new bow, we encourage you to get that bow sooner than later.
Now,
and we've
stat.
got the latest reviews on all the latest and greatest bows. We got a 2022 bow comparison that we'll link down in the bottom for you to check out.
Yep.
So
Other
make
than
sure,
that.
yeah, like and subscribe, follow along, check us out on our social media channels, and we'll see you in the next video.